All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Zoe Sims. I'm a third-year PhD student here, co-advised by Dave Tillman and Kelly Taylor. I'm passionate about applying the principles of ecology and systems thinking to more sustainable agriculture. As we know, agriculture is essential for humanity, and it is a cause of major environmental harms. Agriculture uses a third of the land on Earth. Agricultural land clearing is a major driver of habitat loss and species extinctions, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And fertilizer use in agriculture produces both air and water pollution, as unused fertilizer that's applied to crop fields can leach to groundwater and surface waters where it disrupts ecosystems and is a human health concern, or it's emitted as a local air pollutant or the potent greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide. My research studies how we can use crop biodiversity to potentially decrease these environmental impacts of agriculture while meeting human food demands within our current agricultural systems. In natural ecosystems, plant biodiversity is a key driver of productivity and stability. This principle also applies in agricultural systems, as humans around the world who've eaten plants forever have long known. I'm focused here on intercropping, which we define as the practice of growing more than one crop within a given field. Here we see a field site I visited last summer in northwestern China. They're growing corn and soy using strict intercropping. And here we see corn and wheat in another nearby field site. The strategy used here, strict intercropping, means it's 4 to 8 rows of each crop alternating across the field. And that's important. It allows us to tailor the planting and harvest timing, as well as the nutrient application to the needs of each crop. And then the stripped edges, they're able to interact and benefit from their complementary resource use. So because the different crops have different peak demands for light, water, and nutrients across the season and time, and down through the soil profile, typically both crops are able to outperform their monoculture yields on the area where they're planted within the intercrop, generally by 20 to 30%. That's a lot. But who driving across the American Midwest has seen fields that look like this? We don't farm like this anywhere in America right now, in spite of the major productivity gains of intercropping. Intercropping would take major shifts for farmers to adopt. Our entire farm system, our agronomic best practices, our supply chains, our machinery, our crop insurance, these are all built for monoculture. So it would be very difficult for a farmer to adopt intercropping practices alone. That's why I approach this as largely a collective problem and approach this from a collective systems shift perspective. We know from experiments that intercropping generally increases crop yields on a single field. But what we don't know is the actual scope and potential for intercropping to impact the crops we actually grow in the places where we actually grow them, in terms of increased production, decreased nutrient pollution, or decreased land requirements for agriculture. That's what I set out to find out. To do this, I'm looking at you can't grow every crop in every place. So only places where both crops are grown are relevant. And then only the land used for those crops are relevant. I'm also going to constrain the production ratio of the two crops must remain the same. That's a major constraint, which really means we're setting a conservative lower bound on the potential scope for intercropping within our current systems. Because of the excellent data availability, I'm using the contiguous United States, where we can look at corn, soy, and wheat production at county scales across the US. We see corn planting here at the top and soy here on the bottom. Together, those 3 crops, corn, soy, and wheat, those are the top 3 crops we produce by land area, and they're together 55% of US crop. You see corn on the top and soy on the bottom, and I assume that it's possible to intercrop those two in the counties where they're both produced. And here's corn and wheat. You notice less overlap here, especially wheat. We produce a lot in the northern US, so we don't grow any corn. Given these constraints, I want to know what is the possible amount of increased production on the current land's use for these crops? And how much less land would it take to produce the amount that we currently produce, of each, constraining the ratios? To do this, we'll take a step back and assess the experimental literature. So for a given crop yield, we can estimate its yield in intercropping. So that's the tons per hectare on the land area used for that crop in the intercrop. At this dashed line of 1:1 would be where intercropping has no impact on crop yields. Below it, intercropping decreases yields. Above it, intercropping increases yields. I'm building on a meta-analysis published by Chinji Lee and colleagues, focusing here, I focus specifically on corn, wheat, and corn, soy intercrops, using strip intercropping because that's the most realistically scalable intercrop planting pattern. And I'm only using experiments that aren't applying really like kind of outlandish levels of fertilizer, which does happen in the experimental literature, and also that aren't increasing fertilizer application to the intercrops. So we can see here again the dashed line representing if there were no impact of intercropping on yields. And across these experiments, the regression line here is giving us the overall effect of intercropping on yield, plus or minus one standard error. Each point showing us an individual experimental year, site, and treatment. Across these experiments, corn yields increase by under intercropping by more than 50%, and soy yields increase by 9%. In corn and wheat intercropping, both crops increase their yield by 25 to 30% on the area where they're planted within intercrop. Looking at county scale yield and production data across the contiguous US, I applied these findings to estimate the potential production increase in the counties that are capable of intercropping these two crops. We see comparatively, the darker green counties here are showing us higher yield increases because of higher intercropping potential in that area. We see lower relative increase in production because of lower relative intercropping potential for corn and wheat, because the areas where we grow those two crops don't overlap as much. Summing across all these counties, we find nationwide a 24% increase in corn and soy production relative to the amount that we currently produce of corn and soy in the counties that are producing both. And for corn and wheat, that's 7%. Importantly, these production increases are occurring at fixed fertilizer input rates. That means more of the fertilizer that's applied to the field is removed from the field as harvest by the crop. And in turn, this means less remains in the field, either leach to the groundwater or surface water as a pollutant, or be emitted as a local air pollutant or as a potent greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide. And these increased production levels at fixed fertilizer input rates also mean more revenue for farmers. Using recent crop prices, we find this translates to about $25 billion in increased revenue for corn and soy, and $800 million in increased revenue for corn and wheat production. Adopting intercropping would take major shifts for farmers, including engineering of machinery that can handle multiple crop types. So the current profitability of intercropping for farmers is not yet clear. What this analysis suggests is that returns to the investment of adopting intercropping could be substantial. There are also other non-market benefits to intercropping. And so at current production levels, we could, across the contiguous US, save 12 million hectares of land, which is 19% of the lands used for corn and soy cropping in the counties that currently produce both, or 500,000 hectares for corn and wheat, which is 7% of the croplands used for those two crops in the counties that currently produce both. This research suggests a realistic potential for intercropping to have a major impact in reducing the environmental impacts of agriculture within our current food system. And further research is essential. First of all, to better understand the fertilizer use efficiency of intercrops and agronomic best practices for these intercrops. I'm working now to better understand and actually update the meta-analysis data that you saw earlier in this presentation to better understand what we know about those best practices and how intercropping can use fertilizer more efficiently. There's also a lot of questions still about the potential profitability of intercropping for farmers and their barriers to adopt it. If you're an economist and you feel like there's a lot more to be done on the economic questions here, I totally agree with you, and I would love to talk afterwards. This work is really important for us to realize the potential of crop biodiversity within fields to maintain current production levels or increase them while decreasing the major environmental costs of agriculture. Thank you so much for your time.
Any questions? Where they're intercropping in China, what is the methodology of harvest there?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. On those large-scale demo sites, they're actually like retrofitting big farm machinery with different implements. So it's like a big wide thing that they've got like a corn, soy strips onto it. They can go up and down the field like that. There are other places where they're using very small machines, like mini tractors. And that's something that is sort of being bandied about as like a possible avenue for intercropping at scale is like if we can get small electric mini farm machines, they're actually way more energy efficient as well and potentially automated, which also saves labor. Thanks for that question.
So were you able to look at quality, like rather, or out of there in terms of what grade you're getting for the grain?
That's an awesome question. Thank you. Some folks have looked at grain quality and like nutrition content of yields from intercropping, and it's generally said that it does improve that content, which ecologically makes sense given how we would expect the crops to be using like better partitioning the soil nutrients. That's not something that's been studied widely enough that I would be able to give some definitive numbers on it. Yeah, there's a lot more work to be done there. Thanks.